From judgment to curiosity. Welcome to Weekly Wisdom. I'm Pastor Cheryl. Today I'd like to talk, continuing our series on healing, which may turn into a monthly series just based on time commitments that I have right now. Prayerfully, I will be able to resume these as actually a weekly wisdom. So I appreciate your patience and the grace of receiving these as they come. But I want to talk about judgment and how that can be a barrier to healing. Because ultimately, when we rush to judge or when we make that our first response to a given situation, in many ways, we close down the opportunity to understand and to engage in dialogue and conversation and for healing to take place. Think about it from the medical analogy of healing, so physical and physiological healing. When you have a disease and you go in, my sister is a physician, and I remember when she was in medical school and she was learning how to take a patient's history. And the first thing, it was like one of the first things when she started interacting with patients, doing rounds. Physicians do their morning rounds, particularly in teaching hospitals. It's a team of them, right? Where you have the attending physician and the interns and residents and medical students are all there. And someone in that group is going to take a medical history. And that's basically asking questions. Asking questions in order to gain an understanding of what's going on within that person's physical being, right? Their physical condition. And the way to do that is not to come in making any assumptions. In fact, even when they have some knowledge, that knowledge only adds to more questions being asked until there are at least enough questions to prescribe a course of action, right? To address what is before them, or to order tests that in essence, the test that a physician prescribes for a patient is another way to ask questions. Because questions are really about gaining access to information that we do not have. And sometimes that information is about someone's medical history. It could be their life history. It could be their attitudes and beliefs. It could be their past circumstances and experiences. It could be all the things that we are can be extracted from us by asking questions. My mother was a great person. She could ask questions like, she was a highly extroverted person, but she had an ability to ask questions, even of people that she knew. Like, she would ask my sister and I questions. My sister and I are both introverts. My sister even more so than I am. But, introvert often, we stay in our own heads. So my mother would, every day, I'd come home from school, she would say, "How was your day?" And I would say fine or okay or some one word answer. And she would just have a series of questions to extract information from me. Never seemed to get tired of doing that. That's just not. I do ask questions, but they tend to not be, I'm not as gifted as my mother was, let's say, in just having conversational, not looking for something particular. She could just do that and would lead you eventually into a conversation. Brilliant at it. And in the last decade or so of my life, I've leaned on that as a conversational tool as I've tried to get better about being more extroverted, particularly in pastoral ministry. the ability to just to ask questions. But part of it is just having a natural curiosity, and also getting over what I think hinders a lot of us, the this is the pressure that we have, particularly in American society, to have all the answers, right? I mean, part of judgment is really a cultural thing that is encouraged, because the idea is we have the answers, and we should be able to spit them out. We know everything we need to know about this group of people. We know everything we need to know about this particular issue. And all that matters is getting out what I know. And if I share with you what I know, assuming that you don't know what I know, then I can convince you. I was in a workshop earlier where someone says, facts don't really convince people. I mean, they do, but when you're having a difficult conversation, a tough conversation, as the workshop I was in was talking about, facts don't convince people. In many of our human instances of disagreement and discord and relational disconnects and problems, the underlying issue is that there's a break in relationship, a break in communication, and that's what needs to be addressed. Well, facts won't help that. And sometimes a relationship is based on how I define my participation in a group that I define, and how I define your participation in a group. And so whether that's based on racial groupings or social groupings or economic groupings, ethnic groupings, even within races or beyond races, community, locational groupings, urban, metropolitan versus ex-urban, suburban versus rural. All of the groupings, the ways in which we put one another into boxes, even understanding that there are people who live within the frames, and whether that's based on location or based on racial, ethnic, gender identities, all of those different ways that we categorize one another. And we then, based on what we think we know about that grouping, and what we've been told and just received without interrogation, information about that grouping, whether it's external or internal sharing. We hear it and we accept it or we reject it, but we make a judgment rather than asking questions. Assumptions and statements rather than interrogation and question asking. So we can make a statement and say, well, this group does this, therefore you must think this way or act this way or behave this way, rather than interrogating motivation. And when I say interrogating, I'm talking about cultivating our curiosity, and through a lens of self-reflection and self-interrogation, to uncover what are our embedded theologies. What do we believe about God without even thinking about? What are our implicit biases? What do we believe about groups of people that we don't ever question? That's what I mean when I say interrogation. So it's not just questioning that moment or the particulars of that circumstances, but it's also, in a larger sense, unpacking what do I believe about something and why. When I grew up, I talked about my mother having these questions. What she used to say about me was that my favorite question was why. That question, I think, has served me well and not and understand, like if I can understand the why of a thing, that makes room for me to get the how and all the other questions that follow. If I can understand the why is a person, why do we want to do this? Why does this work this way? It's been for me a wonderful way of navigating in the world. But it's not the only question. And so the other questions are ones that I probably struggle with more than others. I think in many ways, many of us struggle in different ways. All, many of us have assumptions. It's just a matter of what lane my assumptions come in or come from. And where do I feel most comfortably, where I can just be on autopilot and get in that lane and keep going. You know, when I drive, and I often will drive long distances, particularly pre-COVID especially, but drive from Ohio to Florida or Georgia or Louisiana and just make these trips. And I would often choose a lane, get in that lane and stay in that lane until GPS told me to do something different, you know, until I needed to make that turn, or my memory of that particular road would tell me to do that. But occasionally GPS knows something that you don't. I remember coming back actually from Virginia conference I went to, and I was driving through, about to reach DC, the District of Columbia. And it was telling me to get off the highway and go down some street. And I'm going, this cannot be right. This is GPS telling me to do this. I have it on specifically to give me directions, right? But it's giving me a direction that's not the direction I normally have. So my first thing was not to say, well, I wonder why. And that was the first time that it happened. Now I know why that happens and when that happens, but that was the first time that it happened for me. This was several years ago. And I'm going, why is it giving me direction? Well, the year or two before, on a trip to that same conference, on my way there, it had taken me off the highway down some road that added to my trip significantly, because in the settings, and it wasn't my GPS, it was someone else's GPS, but in her settings, it had, I think the settings said to avoid tolls. After that trip, I never choose avoid tolls. I don't think I had chosen it before that, but I definitely didn't. But in that trip, I knew this detour, and we're driving, and I'm saying it just seemed like we were on the wrong path. And the time that we were projected to be there just didn't make sense. And so I said, and it was my first time going there. And I said to my traveling companion, I said, does this look familiar? Because this was the place that she had gone before. And she's like, no, I don't remember ever going down this road. So I turned on my GPS and it took us back into, all that's going through my mind when my GPS is telling me to get off of the road I'd been on, the directions I was accustomed to go down some street. Now, it was very close to DC, so it wasn't like, it was like turning to go down to a major state, major local street, but it wasn't taking me like to another highway or to another state road. So just, to me, it just didn't make sense. Instead of asking, well, why is it doing this? I just said, I'm not going to do that. Well, after sitting in traffic for a while, once I got to DC, and I'm looking to see, like, what is this traffic? What's the new estimate? Like, how long am I expected to be on this? It was going to add 3 hours going the road the way that I was used to, the standard way of this part of Virginia back to where I live in Ohio. It was going to add 3 hours. It was going to increase the drive by 50%. Now, the reason I didn't get off on the detour essentially that GPS gave me was it was going to add almost 2 hours. But if I had interrogated and say, well, why is GPS going to add 2 hours to a trip? It's because GPS knew that by adding 2 hours, I could save that additional hour by going this different way. And you know what? GPS was right. I still remember that trip. Now I always listen to GPS because I'm saying it now knows something I don't know. What happened was between the previous trip that I was on to this trip that I'm referencing is that GPS had added that function where it incorporated the changes in traffic patterns, the changes that there was an accident or that there was a delay in traffic that was significant enough that it says you need to go a different way to avoid that. Well, having found, now I know that, but I could have found that out probably if I asked, why is it choosing that? And while I'm sitting there in traffic, I could have been looking through. But if I'd followed, I would have made that turn before I actually got caught up in that. Moving from judgment to curiosity says, before I get caught up in my judgment, let me ask a question. Let me move to wonder. I wonder why this person is responding this way. I wonder how the ways in which I am presenting or responding is impacting others. I wonder, why is this person making this request? It doesn't necessarily mean that having curiosity, asking those types of questions is going to solve a problem. That's not what it does, right? It helps to go back to the medical analogy of gathering that history. It doesn't solve, gathering the history doesn't solve it, but it's the first step towards resolution, towards addressing it, towards prescribing a cure or a solution, or just something that will make things better. So I encourage us to seek understanding and knowledge, not by making assumptions, because that's a closed door that only takes what we already have, but by asking questions that expand the limits of our possibilities. That like this hand that's in the background behind me. Which way am I going? That's open to receive. That's why I have that image there. And that hand that's coming out from the vastness of the universe saying, be open fully and completely to whatever direction, how vast it might be, to understanding. I pray that as we continue on this journey of healing and being participants in it, that we can do our part. So often when we're confronted with these huge societal issues and problems, we get overwhelmed. So, well, what can I do? Well, we can start by modeling behavior. And we can start by suspending judgment, halting our statements, and begin to engage our curiosity and ask those questions that lead to healing, because they lead to understanding. They lead to people being seen and heard, not as we suppose them to be, but as they are. To breaking down the barriers between us because we understand each other's life experiences and circumstances, not from our lens, but from the perspective of the other person, the other community. the other. And we build up those empathy skills that enable us to enter into the lives of lives that are vastly different from our own. And help us respond with compassion and grace and love. I pray this time together has been a fruitful one. I would love if you would note in the comments the ways in which asking questions has helped you expand your understanding or knowledge, or how you, or a good question, like your favorite question to ask, or one that you might try going forward to help facilitate healing. Until the next time I see you, love God, love your neighbor, and love yourself. God bless you and keep you. Let God's face shine upon you and grant you peace and wisdom. Until next time, be blessed.